That's right. Now, the number of civil servants earning more than £200,000 a year has more than tripled over the past 10 years. Now, that's considerably more than inflation, I'd guess. 100 individuals, in fact 404 civil service mandarins, earn more than Boris Johnson's claimed salary of £155,000 a year.
Yes, well, the average salary of senior civil servants is £175,000. The average salary of the taxpayers paying their wages, meanwhile, is just over £31,000.
Well, Ventre is the digital campaign manager at the Taxpayers Alliance, a think tank that campaigns for low-tax society, and is with us now. Welcome to the programme. I suppose starting off, shouldn't the civil service have some of the best people? I often complain about the civil service, the culture, the clocking off at 4 p.m, the not working hard, the wanting to stay working at home all the time. A lot of civil service places, actually, people not going into the offices. Surely if we want the best people working for the government, we have to pay them market rates.
Well, it's a fair argument, Tom. And I mean, first of all, thank you both for having me on this morning. But, I think we'll often hear civil servants defend these pay levels by claiming the need to attract high caliber employees. But, let's not forget there are many additional perks, if you like, for working in the public sector. I mean, we're talking about very generous pensions, better annual leave entitlement, more maternity leave. I think it's right that we do want the best people in these roles, but the salary is just one part of it. And I now think there's very clearly an unfair balance which does need to be redressed.
We've just had an email here from one of our viewers or listeners, Sue, who says nobody in the public sector should ever be paid more than the Prime Minister. If he's expected to run the country on less than 200,000, then others can run departments on this. She's got a point, hasn't she?
Well, yes, I do think these figures are bound to shock taxpayers, particularly those in the private sector who are now facing a very substantial cost of living crisis, whilst, of course, earning around 7.5% less on average than their public sector counterparts. And, of course, as we just mentioned, they don't get to enjoy many of those additional perks. But I think if we see things carrying on the way they are, we're going to see standards of living decline for ordinary households across this country, while senior civil servants continue to rake in these enormous sums. And that's off the back of a 70-year high tax burden, no less. I just fail to see how that is a fair deal. And I think it's really time for ministers to start reining in these pay packets and cutting taxpayers a better deal.
It is really, really frightening that we have the highest tax burden in 70 years, since the Attlee government, if I remember correctly. It was really quite extraordinary that we're getting to that point as a society. I wonder, however, though, how much of this is necessarily to do with how much of the civil service pay bill for us is to do with individuals and more to do with how many civil servants there are. To some extent, would it not be good to hire some really brilliant people, potentially on high wages, in order to do the jobs of 2 or 3 people and let others go? Could that save money?
Well, there's an argument for that, Tom, and of course that's understandable. But I think there are a lot of changes that can be made in the civil service to sort of redress this balance beyond even just tackling these star-studded salaries that we're talking about. I mean, we're talking about things like reinstating the exit payments cap, which would put an end to these 6-figure golden handshakes that we see all too often. Capping annual leave entitlements, moving civil servants out of London, as we've seen with the Darlington campus of the Treasury, putting an end to things like trade union facility time, which sees public sector staff actually paid to undertake union duties. I mean, these are simple reforms that are going to save taxpayers billions of pounds a year and reduce that burden.
Do you know what? Talking to people in the civil service, I hear so many times that sort of there are bands within the civil service, and sometimes it's just much easier for the organisation to, instead of letting a terrible employee go, they just leave them on £40,000 a year, and they're sat there doing absolutely nothing, but it's easier than the process of letting them go. How do we make it easier to fire bad civil servants?
Well, exactly, Tom, and it's an endemic problem in the public sector that we're all aware of. I mean, if we want to look at examples of maybe that sort of attitude, perhaps we shouldn't be surprised that the person who topped this entire list was the chief executive of HS2. I mean, as we all know, this is a project which has seen costs spiral. I mean, in fact, spiral is probably too light a term. Projected costs were hitting around £150 billion, and that was before, of course, Phase 2B of the project was binned. But, I mean, we're talking about someone who's taking home around £600,000 a year to run this project. I mean, you'd really have to question whether that amount was being given on merit, and I think taxpayers will be asking the same question.
You're obviously from the Taxpayers Alliance, which deals broadly with, well, how the taxpayer can save money, or how the government can save the taxpayer money. Looking at what government is spending at the moment, where do you think the government could be saving the most? Because let's be honest, we're asked to pay this extra national insurance to fund the NHS, for example. As Tom's been pointing out over the last couple of days, the NHS has never been more funded. I mean, it just seems like all the government wants to do is tax, tax, tax. Where should they be saving money?
Well, to be honest, Mercy, I mean, there's no end of areas where the government could be saving money. It's no secret now that taxpayers' money continues to be wasted on an industrial scale, even in times like these. I mean, there just seems to be this attitude now that waste and that these sort of enormous salaries that we're talking about across the public sector are inevitable, and that taxpayers should just be made to pick up the tab. The truth is that that's a just completely unfair and unsustainable way of managing the economy. And the shortfalls that we've been sort of left with from the pandemic, they should be met with a war on waste in the public sector before any tax rises are even considered. I mean, as things stand, the average household now pays over £1 million in tax in a lifetime. The sustained tax burden is hitting a 70-year high, as we've already discussed. And I think the failure to redress this and to tackle waste instead is now visibly hampering our ability to grow back after the economy. We really need to get that message through to government that there should be a war on waste before any tax rises are considered.
Yeah, I think it's your organisation that offered Sir Keir Starmer a membership card after Prime Minister's questions at one point, because the Labour Party leader started talking about waste and about how we could slim down government. Does that offer still stand?
That offer certainly still stands, Tom. We're really heartened to see the opposition taking up this battle on behalf of taxpayers, and it's a very vital discussion that we need to be having right now.
Well, here we are. Sir Keir Starmer, if you're watching this morning, then do get in touch with the Taxpayers Alliance because they're offering you a membership card.
Yes, I'm not sure he'll take up that offer.
Maybe not. Maybe he's being opportunistic. Who knows? Who knows? Well, Joe Ventre, thank you very much for joining us this morning to go through those very important issues, those issues that affect people watching in our pockets.
Yes. I mean, it's staggering to think that the next Labour government, whenever that will be, might actually end up taxing us less than this current government. I think time to be alive.
I think that there's a pendulum in politics.
Yeah.
And that's when parties are in opposition, they tend to talk about cutting taxes. Yeah. And then when those parties get into government, their taxes go up and up.
Something tells me they wouldn't be trying to cut our taxes if they came in Labour. But hey, a girl can dream. A girl can dream.